Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching. This is the presentation for our group, the Eastern Standard Time Group 1. We're going to present the results of our replication study. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Annalise Ewing, and I'm from Lafayette, Indiana.
I'm Nicole Baumer, and I'm from Allen Park, Michigan.
I'm Lauren Walker, and I'm from Muncie, Indiana.
I'm Ellen Thang, and I'm from West Lafayette, Indiana.
I'm Jan Langton, and I am from Lindenhurst, Illinois.
And I'm Kelly Shupak. I'm from Westfield, New Jersey.
Supporting literature and original study. The study that we used for our replication project was titled Preliminary Efficacy of Prize-Based Contingency Management to Increase Activity Levels in Healthy Adults. It was written by Wendy Donlin Washington, Kelly M. Bana, and Amanda L. Gibson, and published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in 2014. According to this study, obesity is a worldwide problem. Increased physical activity can lead to weight loss. Physical activity is considered operant in nature and can be modified with reinforcers. Recent technology allows physical activity to be easily tracked. The original study used Fitbits to track daily steps. Other studies have targeted the increase of physical activity to prevent obesity and other chronic diseases. These studies used accelerometers like Fitbits and smartphones to track physical activity. One study by Nick, Mateo, and On in 2017 showed that the reinforcement of playing Pokemon Go increased physical activity and decreased sedentary behavior in healthy adults. Another study by Patel et al. In 2016 found that the loss of a monetary incentive increased physical activity in overweight and obese adults. The purpose of the original study was to increase physical activity through increasing the number of steps taken. The researchers set out to evaluate the effects of intermittent prize reinforcement on meeting step criteria. The original study also used bout analysis to characterize the structure of behavior.
Going further on our original study, we're now going to talk about the baseline. The design used in the original study was an ABA reversal, meaning there was a baseline 1, a treatment, and a baseline 2. A Likert form was used at the start of baseline 1 and at the end of baseline 2. The same form was completed both times and included the name, age, weight, height, whether there was asthma diagnosis, any pregnancies, other medical limitations, and also the number of days per week engaged in physical activity, estimated physical activity duration per day, duration of inactivity per day, inactivity due to work or school each day, the interest in increasing physical activity, and to estimate their physical goal or their fitness goal on a 5-point scale. Data was collected each night by participants via an email or text, including their step count for the day. In addition to the nightly check-in, participants also went to the lab 3 times per week for charging and data collection for IOA purposes. During the baseline phase, reinforcement was a daily prize drawing contingent of participants wearing their Fitbit and achieving 2 or more steps within the 24-hour day. If a participant met the 2-step criteria, they were entered into a randomized raffle. 50% of the prizes were of social praise, and the other 50% were small prizes worth up to $5.
As Nicole mentioned, reinforcement was delivered in the form of prize draws, which was a random lottery draw corresponding with either praise or tangible items. Prize draws and prize criteria varied based on the phase of the study. As Nicole mentioned, baseline phases reinforced attendance to the lab for syncing devices and collecting data, as well as achieving 2 or more steps. Prizes were a 50-50 distribution of praise statements or tangible rewards categorized as small rewards worth approximately $1. In the intervention phase, behavior was reinforced with the achievement of step criteria that was based on a 5 of 7 percentile schedule of reinforcement. In the intervention phase, 50% of the prizes corresponded to social praise, 42% corresponded to small prizes, 5% to medium prizes valued up to $15, 2% to large prizes that were valued up to $50, and 1% of the prizes available for reinforcement were corresponded to jumbo prizes valued up to $120. Something to note was that in the original study, participants were unaware of the exact distribution of prize draws. They just knew that half corresponded to praise and half corresponded to tangible items. In the original study, treatment criterion was calculated based on a percentile schedule of reinforcement. This involves steps that's being assigned a number ranking of 1 through 7 in order from lowest total to highest total for the previous 7 days. The criteria for earning reinforcement included if a step total for the day was higher than the 5th highest step total, a prize draw for reinforcement was earned, thus being the 5 of 7 percentile schedule of reinforcement. Step totals were collected in 2 forms of data: self-report via email or text message nightly from the participant to a researcher, and as well as in Fitbit syncs in the lab on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And now to talk a little bit more about the token economy is Ellen.
Similar to the Washington article that uses a type of reinforcement to increase physical activity, in the article by Kranz, Miltenberger, and Balbuena in 2016, token economy was used in order to increase physical activity in individuals with intellectual disabilities. And in this study, they used a preface assessment to find token prizes to use to see if it can increase physical activity in individuals. From baseline to treatment showed that there was an increase in physical activity for 4 out of 5 individuals when token reinforcement was used. Token economy was used for these individuals. Going back to baseline, it showed that all 5 individuals had a decrease in physical activity. This article just shows that reinforcement can improve physical activities in individuals.
Let's take a moment to talk about the original study and treatment fidelity. The original study used subject selection criteria, researchers, and Fitbits to overcome many factors that negatively impact treatment fidelity. Through these efforts, it appears they secured treatment fidelity as follows. Volunteer subjects were recruited from a pool of 13,000 college students. 15 volunteers were chosen and required to complete an eligibility questionnaire used to identify limitations hindering their ability to walk. In the end, 10 females and 5 males satisfied subject selection criteria, a process aimed to overcome treatment acceptability and accessibility issues. The Fitbit itself was chosen as a wearable activity tracking device because it has features not only needed for the study, but is also intuitive for and required by today's consumers. These features include the ability to be customized to suit the user, Bluetooth technology, Android and iOS compatible app, website, available technical assistance, and is found in many stores at reasonable prices, and has many bundles with varied levels of functionality. These functionalities address potential negative impacts resulting from limited resources, incompatibility within natural settings of day-to-day life, and response effort. Researchers were responsible for maintaining environmental support through training and coaching. The Be Active Your Way guide explaining how to increase physical activity was provided to the subjects, but not discussed with them. All Fitbit data downloads, device charging, and presentation of reinforcers were also done by researchers, helping to lessen the potential procedural drift. Participants were left with the responsibility of wearing the Fitbit, walking, bringing the Fitbit to the lab 3 times a week for data downloads and charging, and texting or emailing step quantities to researchers daily. This is the area where participants could impact procedural drift. Through these efforts, it appears they secured treatment fidelity. Let's talk about the original study and Inter-Observer Agreement, the IOA. The process of securing the IOA data required the participants to self-report their daily steps. This was done by texting or emailing the researchers with their data before midnight each day. The researchers then verified the self-reports when the participants brought their Fitbits into the lab to upload their data and charge their devices. As a result, the original study's inter-observer agreement percentage was 99%.
Thank you, everyone. Next, we will be presenting our replication project by the Washington, Banna, and Gibson article of Preliminary Efficacy of Price-Based Contingency Management to Increase Activity Levels in Healthy Adults.
The purpose of our replication study was the same as the original study. We set out to increase physical activity through increasing the number of steps taken. We also evaluated the effects of intermittent prize reinforcement on meeting step criteria.
As for the behavior definition that we used, Washington et al. Didn't give an exact behavior definition for the behavior we were tracking. However, very simply, we made our own definition that fit the criteria of the study, which was placing one foot in front of the other while standing up, where movements are approximately equal distance to others. An example of this would be walking, running, dancing, skipping, using the elliptical, or the treadmill. Non-examples of steps would be swimming or rocking in a chair.
The participants used for the study were a Ball State University student studying applied behavioral analysis, ranging between the ages of 23 and 60. Us participants of the study reside in the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and New Jersey.
The materials needed for this study were a Fitbit, the Fitbit application, an intake questionnaire that will be shown later, an activity guide titled Be Active Your Way, prizes, which will be described later, the raffle numbers application that was used to generate numbers for the prize draws, a computer with internet access, a smartphone with internet access, and access to Google Documents.
The study used an ABA reversal design where each phase lasted 1 week. For data collection, each participant was responsible for recording her own data. Participants indicated step counts in a Google spreadsheet entitled SPCE 611 EST1 Project IOA Google Sheet. Participants also uploaded their step counts daily to the Daily Showdown option of the Fitbit Challenge on Fitbit.com. In addition, a Likert form was completed at the start of Baseline 1 and at the end of Baseline 2.
Going on with the baseline, as previously mentioned, similar to the original study, we completed a Likert form at the beginning of the Baseline 1 and at the end of the Baseline 2. An example of this form, titled Questionnaire, can be seen on the right of this slide. The form we used included the same questions used in the original study. During the baseline, each participant collected their own data and uploaded it each night. The next day, a predetermined person screenshot the daily challenge and uploaded it into the designated file of the shared Google Drive. From there, partners input each other's steps into the IOA chart, which will be discussed further. In order to meet the 5-7 criteria during the intervention, Baseline 1 had to be a minimum of 7 days, whereas Baseline 2 was until a stable or a decline due to time restraints. We also provided reinforcement based on a 50-50 distribution during the baselines. As long as the participant wore the Fitbit and achieved 2 or more steps, a reinforcement prize was provided. 50% were congratulatory texts, and the other 50% were small prizes of about $1.
Each participant was responsible for calculating their own step criteria. Step totals from the Fitbit platform provided the data. Method for tracking and assigning rankings was up to the participant. We utilized, similar to the original study, we used the same percentile schedule of reinforcement. Every completed day of treatment was assigned a ranking of 1 through 7, and any day with a total higher than the 5th highest day resulted in reinforcement. Due to the nature of the project, our study was reliant on the participants to not only record and report their own data, but also to reinforce increased STEP activity. The original study had an assortment of prizes that all participants had the same probability of obtaining, contingent on performance of target behavior. For our purposes, however, each participant selected their own prizes for each reinforcement tier. A chart was compiled to identify prizes, and each participant selected an item they would purchase should they receive reinforcement. Categories were similar to the original study, but the price total was lowered to reduce financial strain on each participant. As you can see, we still had a verbal praise prize component that was provided via communication with the IOA partner. The small prizes which were utilized during baseline were valued at $1. Medium prizes were valued at $5. Large prizes had a value of $10, and jumbo prizes had a value of approximately $30. In order to ensure the selection of prizes was random, each participant downloaded the same app called Raffle Numbers. Using the same application was crucial to ensure that the same logarithm was used to generate each person's number. Numbers were associated with each prize tier. During baseline, even numbers resulted in verbal praise and odd numbers resulted in a small tier prize. You can see on this chart previously here that we recorded all of our data on, or we recorded our choices on. Right here at the bottom is where we set forth the rules for determining prize draws. An odd number between 7 and 89 was associated with small prizes, which was 42% of available numbers. Odd numbers between 91 and 99, or 5% of the numbers, were medium tier prizes. 91 through 99 odd numbers were 2% of the numbers, were large tier prizes, and the number 1 resulted in a jumbo prize with a 1% chance of being chosen. Delivery of reinforcement upon meeting the criteria was the sole responsibility of the participant. If the participant earned a lottery ticket, she was responsible for purchasing and using the ticket. Similarly, if a Starbucks drink was drawn, she would have to take the time to go to Starbucks and purchase the drink. This may have had an effect on the strength of reinforcement, which will be discussed in the limitations section later on in our presentation.
To calculate the study's IOA percentage, the team developed a data recording tool, a capture and compare process, and an overall study IOA percentage calculation process. An IOA spreadsheet was created for data entry. A snapshot of a portion of the IOA spreadsheet can be seen on your screen now. The formula used to calculate the IOA percentage was the total count formula because the study used an event recording measurement system. The formula was smallest divided by largest number of steps times 100. The team captured and compared daily steps for IOA percentage calculations. Participants were assigned specific partners, observers, and required to participate in the Fitbit Daily Showdown Challenge. The Daily Showdown Challenge enabled the group to capture daily steps and display them to the entire group for verification purposes. Participants input their self-reported steps into the spreadsheet. Their partners input their steps from the Daily Showdown Challenge into the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet calculated the IOA percentage. At the end of the study, captured data was used to determine the overall IOA percentage for the study. Data was mined over 20% of the sessions across all observers, phases, and days. If you look at the IOA spreadsheet, you will see colored cells. These cells indicate those days, phases, and observers where IOA data was used for overall study calculation. To make sure data was fairly taken across all days, phases, and observers, a chart was made to give a visual depiction of the data used to calculate the IOA percentage of the study. The Eastern Time 1 study's IOA percentage was 99.9%, well above the acceptable 80%. The Eastern Time 1 study used treatment fidelity assessment, team collaboration and training, and Fitbits to overcome many factors that negatively impacted the treatment fidelity as follows. Team members were required to complete an intake questionnaire used to identify limitations hindering their ability to walk. All team members satisfied the selection criteria, a process aimed to overcome treatment accessibility issues. A treatment fidelity assessment was created containing a task analysis of all steps that needed to take place in order to secure treatment fidelity, where interventions are implemented correctly and consistently to obtain for all subjects throughout the life of the study. As with the original study, the Fitbit was chosen as a wearable activity tracking device because it does have features not only needed for the study, but also for accessibility and ease of use. The functionalities possessed by the Fitbit, such as its ability to be customized to suit the user, Bluetooth technology, the Fitbit app and website, available technical assistance, and its availability in many stores at reasonable prices, address potential negative impacts resulting from limited resources, incompatibility within natural settings of day-to-day life, and response effort. Participants were provided with the Be Active Your Way guide and relied upon the Fitbit app and the internet for Fitbit training, coaching, and technical support. However, team collaboration was the biggest source of training and technical support throughout the study. Participants' responsibility were to complete the treatment fidelity assessment daily, wear the Fitbit, walk, data downloads, device charging, update the IOA spreadsheet, and reinforce themselves and other participants, all of which impact procedural drift. The Eastern Time 1 project team's treatment fidelity was 92.2%, securing treatment fidelity for the project. A graphical display of overlooked intervention tasks has been included in the slide. Remembering to update the IOA spreadsheet and determining if steps qualified for reinforcement were the most overlooked items on the treatment fidelity assessment.
Next, we will be discussing our individual results from the replication of the study of using contingent reinforcement management with the ABA reversal design.
When reviewing my data graph, there was initially a stable upward trend in the first baseline phase. Then we can see that the data points become quite variable, and this variability stayed throughout the rest of the study. With the exception of one data point in the intervention, when I was sick with the flu, the steps in my intervention phase were higher than most of the totals in the initial baseline phase. In the second baseline phase, I started out maintaining a high step count, but after a few days the step totals returned to the lower frequency. The ranges of my steps were anywhere from 1,700 to just under 10,000. Visual analysis is difficult to utilize due to the variability of the data, but when comparing the averages, I was able to determine that I did achieve a higher activity rate in the intervention phase than in either of the baseline phases. You can also see that the average of steps in the second baseline phase was slightly higher by just about 100 steps from the average of steps in my first baseline. I wasn't actually particularly motivated by the reinforcers, even though I chose them and I picked ones that I thought would be reinforcing. I think it had to do with it being my responsibility to reinforce myself. I was more motivated in knowing that I was participating in the study and what the goal of the study was. Also, I had the flu during the intervention phase, and weekends in general for me tend to have a lower activity rate, especially while the weather is cold, and I really believe this played a big role in the general variability of my data.
As I view my graph of data results, I see baseline 1 was really stable, ranging within a 1,400 step spread. The trend was rather flatlined, with no real increase or decrease in steps. The intervention phase appears to be unstable, but throwing out the outlier, heads down studying, It was only about 2,000 step spread. Therefore, I consider it stable. Though slight, toward the latter part of the phase, the trend was upward, reflecting a slight increase in steps. Baseline 2 was also stable, ranging within a 1,900 step spread. Baseline 2, however, reflected an upward trend as steps increased. When comparing all of the averages across phases, all of them were within 350 steps of one another. This indicates to me that the contingency management had little to no impact on my behavior. Although I qualified for prizes 4 out of the 7 days in the intervention phase, I was not reinforced by contingency management. My motivation was really more in line with seeing other subjects' steps and the sheer feeling of responsibility toward contributing to the project. Still, the thing that really prevented me from going all out were the responsibilities I have at home and at BSU. They were the priority. Beyond experiencing losing a pound a day or wrinkles or the doctor telling me if I don't do this right now or I would be dead in a week, I was not motivated to increase my steps. I had the flu during the study, and this might have contributed to why some days had fewer steps than others.
So for me, the data was stable in baseline 1, but it was more variable in the intervention phase. And I think in part that was due to the weather. We had several days of very good weather, and I was much more motivated to go outside and to walk during this time. Step count overall ranged from about 1,300 steps to a little over 5,000 steps. And in general, I was not very motivated by the reinforcement, even though I thought they were prizes that would be very appealing to me and very motivating to me. It ended up being difficult to obtain them at sometimes, and also to then use them. It was just not motivating. I did not hit my goal every day. Sometimes it was due to bad weather or due to illness. Other times it was due to work constraints or simply family obligations.
My data showed a variable trend pretty much throughout the whole replication project. There are some increasing trend and decreasing, but mostly it looks variable. Average daily steps increased during the intervention and fell during baseline 2. Lower sides of the range increased during the intervention, but higher ends of the range was slightly low. However, during baseline 2, which had the highest of the low end in the range, and based on the replication project, we are reinforcing ourselves if we reach higher than the 5 out of 7 days of the previous day's steps. And I did not receive reinforcement until the 5th day. I was really not motivated by my own contingency management. The reinforcements were too small, even though I did pick it myself. And some of the drops in data most likely occurred during the weekends where I had low motivation and not really anywhere to go. During the week, I'm on my feet about 8 hours a day for the workday, and that resulted in a lot of these high numbers in the 12,000s and 10,000s. But on the lower ends, it's most likely from the weekend.
My data had some variability to it. Some of this was due to illness, and I do not feel my baseline is representative of my typical physical activity. My average increased during intervention and decreased in baseline 2, but it was still higher than baseline 1. My ranges were similar in that they increased during intervention and then decreased some during baseline 2, but still remain higher than the original baseline. There were 2 days during intervention that I did not receive reinforcement. I was not particularly motivated by the prizes since I was funding them, and I found that I was more motivated by the social aspect of the Fitbit challenges. However, sometimes life got in the way.
As you can see, my data varied throughout all phases. Looking at baseline 1, you can conclude that there was a slight upward trend. During the intervention phase, you can see a downward trend, and baseline 2 varied too much to even see a trend. When looking at my averages, you can, however, conclude that my interventions average at 4,686 was higher than my baseline 1, and it is also important to note that even with a fluctuating baseline 2, the average remains similar to the intervention at 6,601. The range for my baseline 1 was 2,308 to 5,919. For the intervention was about 2,000 to 6,000, and the baseline 2 range was 0 to nearly 9,000. During the intervention phase, I only achieved my reinforcement the first 2 days. There were a few limitations in addition to some that were mentioned, such as the weather and motivation. But I also had my gallbladder removed at the start of the study. Although I was recovered, I was still having some problems with understanding what my body could take and some exhaustion. Along with that, on March 6th, you can see that my step count was recorded as a 0. On that specific day, my Fitbit was having some technical difficulties, and I was unaware of it until I attempted to sync it at night, and I could not register my steps because nothing was recorded that day.
In conclusion, all 6 participants completed the study, though each participant had baseline phases of varying length. Overall, 5 of the 6 participants saw an increase in the total average of steps during the intervention phase. Though many data were variable, visual analysis supports the conclusion that the intervention was successful. All treatment and reinforcement were the responsibility of the individual participants, which may have influenced the results, and we will discuss later in the limitations.
As some of our participants for the replication project has stated and explained, there were illnesses that occurred during the replication project that does account for some variability. Secondly, as the original study shows, everybody went into the lab in order to sync their data and to receive direct reinforcement from the researcher. We were unable to do this, and we had to be in charge of our own reinforcement, which leads to the next point. It shows that we found that the social aspects of receiving reinforcement was really important. Being in charge of our own reinforcement was not enough to motivate us. However, some people did find that the daily challenges in the Fitbit app did show some sort of social motivation for taking more steps that day. Next, for the lack of motivation, most people have other things going on in their lives, and the project couldn't exactly be the first thing on their mind that day. In addition, different Fitbit devices were used for the study. Not everybody had the exact same device. However, we did try to use a Fitbit device versus another accelerometer by a different brand, which could account for treatment fidelity here. In addition, we did not initially have the discussion of what was considered stable without looking at the trend and how we graphed it. Looking at it numerically, what was considered stable would difference between 1,000 steps really make a difference on the stability of the projection of our intervention and how we were reinforced. For example, in some of my phases, one day could be 9,000 and the next day could be 10,000, followed by another day of 9,000, which I found to be stable, but graphing it could look variable versus other days, other weeks where I was graphed at 2,000 one day and 8,000 one day, which was a lot more obvious and easier to predict the stability and variability of the treatment phase or the phases that we were in. Next, for the bout analysis, next for the reinforcement, this was discussed earlier as well. We were unable to receive reinforcement directly from the partners, which was not very effective in this contingency management replication project. Next, for the bout analysis, which was one of the main One of the other research questions that was used in the original study, we were unable to replicate. First, because the researchers in the original study found that the bout analysis did not have an effect on increasing physical activity. And what bout analysis explains is the number of steps taken per second, which was found to be about 1.2 steps per second. This did not change during baseline or intervention phase, and we found that it was not necessary to replicate this. In addition, we were unable to replicate this due to our limitations of obtaining special permission from the Fitbit developers. And lastly, this was an issue due to the current season that we were facing and the different weathers that we were facing. We were unable to go outside and walk during the intervention phase or during the replication study, which we found to be all right to use treadmills or ellipticals and other forms of physical activity to replicate the study as well, which concludes our limitations for the study. And thank you to these authors and their articles for our references. Thanks, everyone.
We want to thank you again for watching our presentation, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you, everyone.